Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of your Brains Coach podcast. My name is Angela Shurina. I'm your host. I'm your Brains Coach, and it is my job here to bring to you all the recent, most interesting, best, cutting edge, most useful, and most effective brain body tools so you could take better control of your brain, of your body, of your emotions, of your decisions, and most importantly, of your actions so you could create the life experience you desire. And the life experience we desire, first we gotta build ourselves, and specifically that thing between our ears, our brain. We gotta train that if we want to get better at doing anything in life. I'm a huge fan of the brain. That's why in the next couple of years, going to start my also neuroscience degree. Just want to understand how it works. And it seems like the more we understand our brain as a society, the more we understand the biology, the underpinnings of its workings, and the more we understand how our psychology based on our biology, the more we connect that. And also we learn how environment influences the way our brain works, and then our thoughts and our emotions, our actions. The more we understand all of that, the better we get at mastering ourselves. And that is what excites me, and that's why probably this podcast will never have the lack of topics to talk about, because our brain is just the most complex thing and ever evolving in the entire universe, and we're just at the very beginning of exploring and learning more about that. Besides my geeky fascination with the brain, today is my also second geeky fascination with books. Since I was a kid, when I was growing up, and still my parents have our old apartment, we had this at least one wall with cupboards or like those, stacks of books, and basically home library. But my dad would collect all of these books, and when I was a kid, I would just sit at the bottom of these bookcases, and I would just I would just go and pick up one book randomly and then the other, and would be absorbed in the world of the author of all these different topics that exist, from animals in Antarctica to cooking from 18th century. There was a variety of topics, and that's where my fascination with books and learning and studies and knowledge and what it can do for us started. But then as a kid, I also started going to school and got even more fascinated with knowledge and got a lot of praise from my teachers and parents and in life in general. And being witty and knowing a lot of things about life and people and different facts definitely served me well. That's why I am where I am, however imperfectly, but it served me really, really well. And knowing more about the world, it just fascinates me. So doing this book studies on Mondays is probably going to become a tradition. And for you, dear listener, it's also a way to familiarize yourself with this different variety kind of books dedicated to self-improvement, but from a more scientific point of view. I don't like self-improvement books when somebody just decides to talk about their life experience and certain conclusions and tools. Kind of interesting, but kind of also not, because it's very individual, and what works for one person, yes, we can try, and those things can work for us, obviously. But I love more science-based and backed research-based tools because they're more universal. No matter how unique we are, 99.9% of us probably the same, especially genetically. And then we have all this, small percentage of uniqueness. But when it comes to different protocols based on biology, based on psychology, good research and good studies, whatever protocols mentioned based on those studies, they're going to work across the board. Like, for example, we know that writing things down, things that worry us, different anxious thoughts, or things that are important to us, and we don't want to screw them up. We don't want to choke, right? If it's an important negotiation or important deal you're trying to close, or maybe an important sale or important presentation. When we write those things down, emotionality of that lowers, and we can not only do our best, but also stress levels go down and we feel better, and then we can unlock more of our talents. So that's across the board. Writing things down, simply the act of it, not typing it out, but writing it down, brings down your nervous system, your stress, your anxiety, your worries level down, and you feel calmer, you feel physiologically and psychologically better, and then you can go out there and live your life fuller, expressing more of your talents and potential. So that's just one of the tools, and because it's research based and based on really good amount of also practical evidence, it works for anyone, whoever tries it. That's why I love research-based tools a lot more. But then let's get back to our book study, or I'm going to be here for hours talking about everything related to self-mastery and research around that. So the book that we are digging deeper today, I recently finished it just a couple of days ago. The book is called Right Kind of Wrong: Why Learning to Fail Can Teach Us to Thrive by Amy Edmondson, a researcher who did a lot of research in real life and interviewed a lot of experts on different topics in psychology, and also talked to neuroscientists, amazing researcher, and wrote this book, Right Kind of Wrong: Why Learning to Fail Can Teach Us to Thrive. The book is all about how to fail right, and how to also not make failure become our enemy, but instead look at it as what it actually is. It's a teacher, an experience that will tell us where to go from there, how to fix things that aren't working, and how to do it better next time. But because of our innate negative response to failure and our want or urge to avoid that, because also failure, yes, it is a waste of resources if you look at it like that. Like when we fail, we don't do it right, so we try to avoid it first. And then if we fail, we try to kind of forget that experience. And that's what research shows. Most people try to brush it off and fail to learn from that. Do not use the opportunity to get better through one of the most amazing teachers, failure. And because of that, people don't develop as fast. And we get kind of stuck in loops of our mistakes and failures that might have different face, but in the core, they are the same. And that's why very often in life or in business, we might feel like we are going through patterns, we are going through loops. And the way of that loop is actually look in the face of our failures, or that feedback that life gives to us. And instead of avoiding that, having this negative emotions, look into that with curiosity. Like, that didn't go as I planned. I wonder why. Let me explore this. One of the tools that I give to all of the clients I work with, for example, based on research, research by Amy Edmondson, but also others, I tell my clients to adopt Edison frame. You know, Thomas Edison, who invented, among a lot of other things, electric bulb. That's why we have electricity and light in our houses. So he historically and famously did like 10,000 mistakes or failures. He failed 10,000 times before he invented electric bulb. But when his assistant once asked him, or a story goes, aren't you kind of disappointed with all these failures? What keeps you going? To which Thomas Edison replied, I have not, it's not the exact quote, but almost, I have not failed 10,000 times. I just found 10,000 times that this doesn't work, and I'm 10,000 steps closer to finding the solution. And that's the kind of approach or kind of attitude that we want to have to our failure. Failure actually when we actually lean into failure, when we actually decide to get curious about it and we decide to learn from it, failure is the best teacher, the most accelerated way to unlock more of our potential and move forward in our journey, whether that's business, relationships, or our health. When we fail, we have the opportunity to understand what we're doing wrong, how to correct it, and then how to make progress faster. But let's talk more about the book. I'm gonna share with you what I learned from this book, new things I learned about failure, and what I'm going to apply also in my life. And that hopefully will help you to also get better at failing and, most importantly, dealing and feeling better about failure. I think I got, over the course of my entrepreneurial journey for the past 10 years, I got quite good at looking at failure, but sometimes still, it triggers some negative emotion that I need to get over in order to effectively learn from failure, apply the lessons, and then move forward, but better. So a couple of things I learned about failure. There is a difference between failure and a mistake and a violation. So in the book, Amy, the author, talks about how failure is results, when we get results that are different from what is expected, what is planned. So that is a failure. Like, for example, we thought that this amount of leads will bring us that amount of sales, and we tried that and that didn't work. We got much less or maybe no sales. So that is failure. And now from that failure, ideally, we would like to learn to improve the process so we can plan again and see how that works. Now, mistake, on the other hand, is following the wrong protocol altogether. The difference is slight, but it's kind of like when you decide to make a recipe of some cookies, and instead of sugar, you put salt. So the procedure for the result that is expected, for a delicious cookie, it's known. And as long as you follow the recipe, you are almost guaranteed to get the result. And if you just made a mistake and you put salt instead of sugar, then you get the mistake and you get the wrong result. But in the book, there is a distinction between that kind of mistake and failure. And the main difference is what I took away from the book is that failure happens more in a complex environment, when you're kind of like running an experiment almost. Whereas mistake, it's like, well, the process is known, you just because of our inattention or overconfidence or assumption, we just get it wrong. We do it wrong because, again, we didn't pay attention or we were too confident. Maybe we didn't take an umbrella because we were too confident that the weather is going to be great, but maybe the forecast was actually for rain and we just made this mistake of judgment. Or perhaps we assumed that somebody, let's say, thinks negatively about our work or anything that we do, and because of that, we took a specific action, and that was a mistake, but mistake because we assumed something. So in the book, Amy talks a lot about this kind of distinctions between failures and mistakes, and also she separates different kinds of failure. So there is basic failure, there is complex failure, and there is intelligent failure. So basic failure is when the environment is quite predictable. It's something like, let's say, a factory, and they have an assembly line where the process is known, and you get to make, certain car parts or certain, pens on pencils, and then there is faulty equipment or something like that, and you get a faulty result. So that is kind of a failure. Or maybe you installed new set of machines and there was failure, and because of one tweak, you get a wrong result. So that's kind of like basic failure. You tweak something that is known and it works right again. Then you have complex failure. For that failure, Swiss cheese metaphor was used, and it helps me also to understand it better and to explain it better. This complex failure applies to complex systems, like, for example, launching a rocket or flying an airplane, or making sure that patients in hospitals get the right kind of treatment. Why is it complex, and why is it different, and what does it have to do with Swiss cheese? Like Swiss cheese has those holes in it, and sometimes you get a head of cheese that has many holes kind of combined together, and you get almost like a tunnel in your cheese. Like, imagine that. So with complex failure, it's kind of the same. It's not one separate failure, one mistake. It's a lot of those coming together, creating a huge problem. So for example, when it comes to launching a rocket, like NASA did a few unfortunate launches that caused people to die. And what would happen is, somebody didn't pay attention or thought it was not that important, that some tube was too rigid or frozen or something else, but then that caused something else, and that caused something else, and that caused something else, and then you get an explosion and a whole bunch of bad things happening, right? So that's why Swiss cheese metaphor, it's like one thing, small thing, another small thing, another small thing, another small thing. Or in a case of hospitals, for example, if there was one example about how medical personnel overdose a drug and the patient almost died, but luckily they noticed it and they were able to reverse the effect. But the whole thing happened was the new nurse was on the shift, and then the medication that they were supposed to give to the person, it didn't have clear enough label, and then the younger nurse had to ask for an older nurse help, and then she had busy day or didn't pay too much attention, and those like kind of small things, one on top of the other, accumulated, and the patient got almost fatal dose of the medication. And again, luckily they were able to reverse it. But perhaps now you get the idea. So complex failure happens usually in complex systems where you have a lot of different inputs, a lot of connected events or players, and a lot of different parts and relationships between them. And so one thing goes wrong, and then it causes the other thing to not go well, and then another, and you get this Swiss cheese, this big hole in your cheese that ends up sometimes being catastrophic kind of failure. So that's complex failure. The last kind of failure, it's called intelligent failure, and that is the most interesting one, the one that we want to have more of. So what is intelligent failure? That is when we decide to run an experiment, when we decide to learn through the process, when we decide to innovate in a startup environment as an entrepreneur, for example. That's when you decide to try a new sales strategy. And what distinguishes this intelligent failure and why we want to have more of that? Because the design of that process, when there is a high probability of that failure, the design, the why, the purpose is to learn through that. Yes, we want to achieve certain results, like, for example, increase in sales. But first of all, the territory is new. We've never done it before. And perhaps somebody else, ran a similar process. But in our specific case, it's a new thing, and nobody really did that exact combination of things. Nobody put it together. So it's a novel environment. And you are more in a mindset of running an experiment. Like, I want the result to increase the sales, and I'm going to run this process. But the result is actually not guaranteed, because there are so many also different things that come into play, and, the timing and different people involved. And so you run this process, and at the end you get the result. And that is what called when the result is not what we expect it to be, or that with positive intent. So the result is different. And that is the intelligent failure, from which we actually need to learn to get better, redesign the process, and then most often try again. That is also the closest to experiments they do in science. So they create hypotheses, like this is how we think this is gonna work. Let us run an experiment or a study or a research. And so we run it and then we get a result. If the result is as expected, it is success. If the result is as not as expected, then it is failure. But is it really failure? Let's think about that. No, it's a learning experience. The result is not what we want it or what we expect it to be, but we get the results nonetheless. And because of that, we can learn from it, and then we can educate ourselves, redesign the process, and try again, but better, having usually more chances to succeed. So the main differentiator of that intelligent failure that we want as leaders, as innovators, as entrepreneurs, change agents, why we want more of this intelligent failure is because it educates us. It teaches us a lot of new information that then we can apply again and get better and create something that is successful and works really great. So what distinguishes this type of failure? Well, the purpose is to guide a certain process, to educate us, to learn from it, to advance certain goal, certain cause. Also, it is calculated, so we design the process. It doesn't just happen. We design the process. Also, usually with intelligent failure, we run calculated, or we take calculated risks. So we don't just bet everything on it unless we absolutely have to, but we actually take smaller bets so we can always go back and redesign the process and start it again. So eventually we can succeed. And also, intelligent failure is usually informed. Again, we have the information how we are running this thing, although we might not have all the information, but we have quite a lot of it, and we're designing this process with the thought in mind that it might not work. And then also a very important differentiator is novel environment. So we are trying something that hasn't been done before. We are running an experiment. It's like when they were creating airplanes. The territory was novel. Nobody knew what they were doing, and they failed a lot. And those were the kind of failures that helped them to succeed. And in the book, the whole intent of the book was to tell us that certain failures, we need to embrace them, we need to celebrate them, but also failure in general, we need to have a positive attitude towards it. So we look that failure in the eyes, we'll learn from it, and either design new experiment to do better and eventually succeed, or we'll learn how to prevent certain failures. Like maybe next time when you make those cookies, don't have your sugar and salt and in the same containers or side by side, so you have less chances of screwing up the recipe, right? So when it comes to basic failures, when it comes to complex failures where we're not really running any experiments, the best way to deal with those is try to do our best to prevent it by paying more attention, by creating the processes based on our previous experience that have more security built into them, like in the case of hospitals, right, or launching rockets. Like we need those checklists, we need the procedures, we need a system of double checking things, so failure has very little chance of happening. The more at stakes, and that's what Amy also talks about in the book, the more at stakes, the more careful and slow we need to be with the process. Like, for example, when we are running tests for some medications on real people, obviously we need to put more thinking into designing the process so we do not harm people, at least intentionally, and in the cases when it can be avoided. But also in the book, Amy emphasizes the idea that sometimes failing really, really fast when the stakes are low, like there was an example about the game. The purpose of the game was to find a path from one side of the room to another, and the path was through a bunch of squares, some of which were beeping. And the purpose of the team was to find the path that didn't beep at all. And the fastest way to go through this whole thing was to just step on one square after another and figure out which ones beep faster. So fail faster, step and step and step, and start again and step. So yeah, then they had to start again when they found one beeping square. And so in this scenario, when the stakes are very, very low, and in this scenario, the faster we fail, the faster we experiment, the faster we find what doesn't work, the faster we'll find solution. Another example, like from my personal business experience, is when you want to find the way to generate leads the fastest and the stakes are low. Like, for example, you get in touch with 100 people and you try a specific conversation pattern. Well, what are the stakes? The person never gonna talk to you again? Well, that was a stranger in the first place, and there are millions and billions of strangers, in fact, so the stakes are quite low, unless, of course, you decided to get in touch with like very important person, and that can then potentially influence your whole career. That might be high stakes situation, right? But if it's just a bunch of strangers, you can try anything. It doesn't matter what they're gonna think about you, unless you piss them off and then they decide to do something. But that's for another story. But that's where failing really, really fast, getting in touch with more and more people really fast, and failing fast, and learning from those conversations, that's where it helps to actually succeed a lot faster. So when it comes to failure, when it comes to mistakes, you also want to differentiate. And in the book, Amy talks about that between low stakes situations and high stakes situations. And so if the stakes are low and faster experimentation works towards creating or finding the solution faster, then do that. Obviously, if the stakes are higher, like people's lives, for example, are at stakes, then you want to slow down and design the procedure at which you still can fail, like with medications, for example, and experiments, but you'll fail less, and each experiment you're going to be designing a lot more carefully. A couple of other concepts that I wanted to share with you from the book that I found interesting, that were kind of aha moments. First of all, there was a concept, play to win or play not to fail. I never actually thought about that, but it is different. Playing to win means you're okay with failing on the way to that win, and you're just going to push forward and fail and learn from that and get better, eventually winning. It's like, if I want to build my dream business, I'm playing to win, and that means I'm ready, prepared to take action and fail and learn from it and get better to eventually build that dream business, whatever that business is. Now, playing not to fail means I'm not ready to fail. I'm going to avoid failure, but that also means that I'm going to shortcut my learning process. And that means more often I'm going to stay in the zone of comfort, where guess what? Not a lot of transformation happens, not a lot of change happens. And that's how people end up doing the same thing, because it is safer, because they don't want to fail, whether that's staying at the job that they hate or staying in a relationship that they hate. Playing to not fail means staying in your zone of comfort, where most likely you're not going to be winning or seeing a lot of progress. Playing to win, on the other hand, means I'm saying yes to failure, learning from it, getting better, and getting to the result that I want. And I didn't realize that, but I've always been playing to win. Well, to be honest, maybe not 100% all the time. Sometimes we all do kind of try to avoid failure, or subconsciously not driving fully forward at all speed, because that will increase the chance of failing, right? But the more I read, the more experience I get, the more I listen to smart people and see how successful people live their lives, the more I start acting in my life playing to win. And what I'm realizing now, that's the only way to build anything worthy, anything that you want, anything that you dream about, anything that is different from what you have now. You gotta play to win, not play to not fail. A couple of other useful things and strategies. For example, one, how to get better at not reacting negatively to failure. One of the strategies, and I always recommend it to my clients, get a hobby. Have a low stakes situation where you're learning a lot, you're failing a lot in order to get better. So for example, one of my hobbies now is handstands and doing gymnastics training. Guess what? Every time I go there, I'm just failing throughout the whole process. But next time I get there, I get better. But that teaches me to endure failure and being okay with feeling uncomfortable and the feeling that arises of a little bit of anxiety, worries, and dissatisfaction, right? Feeling that and still making progress. And how you do anything is how you do everything in life. So you always have the same brain. So when you learn how to react to failure more positively and lean into it and learn from it instead of avoiding it or running away from it, you also apply the same mindset and the same skill to other areas of your life, like business. And that's where when something fails at your business, you're like, well, let me try again. That's how we get better, right? So get a hobby. Like for me, again, handstands and gymnastics this year. Another useful tool a lot of leaders and companies use is to not call those failed experiments and attempts failures, but pivots. You're like, well, we learned this didn't work, let's pivot. And I've been pivoting in my business for quite some time now. Now I'm finally finding what's working, but that has been a lot of pivoting. And I guess with those 10 years of experience, I kind of got okay with failing and then just trying again. I need to get better personally at looking deeper into that failure and doing daily reflections somewhere around 5 to 6 p.m. where my work day is usually finished and then I still have energy. So and everything is still fresh to just sitting down for 5 to 10 minutes and looking at what I did, what worked, what didn't work, and what I need to do better or want to do better or different next day. But then again, the tool here is framing failure different, pivoting. Another useful concept that Amy talks a lot about in her book is how do we build a environment where where people look at failure more positively. Like how do we build communities and organizations where we embrace failure? Because also in the book, Amy talks a lot about how if we report failure, if we talk about a failure, we have a lot more chances of spotting those failures and then improving the process. But because failure has this negative connotation, like, I failed, I made a mistake, or maybe I might get judged, or I might get some even negative consequence at work, because failure has this negative connotation. People don't often talk about that and don't report it and kind of make it look like they're just succeeding all the time. In most successful organizations, actually, they make sure that there is a failure, that there is a culture of psychological safety where people feel safe to report their mistakes and their failures because they know they're not going to be judged, but instead they're going to be celebrated for bringing the lessons that will improve processes and organizations, right? So how do we create this psychological safety? And Amy gives examples of the most successful companies, how they do it. And usually they celebrate failure in one way or the other. Leaders show that they don't know all the answers. They show when they make mistakes. They admit when they are wrong. They say sorry. They say how they're going to change and fix the situation. Leaders in those organizations on different levels talk about their failures as well. They report mistakes publicly. Also, in those organizations, there is usually some form of nameless reporting when people don't, put their name on failure or mistake, but they notice something while perhaps doing their job, or maybe they make a mistake and they report how it happened, what led to that, and what processes perhaps could be improved. So this silent reporting also is a great practice that's been adopted actually in a lot of hospitals, where they report the mistakes, they report different bugs in the system that then are used to improve the processes and make the system more failure and mistakes proof, especially, people's lives in hospitals are at stakes. So creating the culture of psychological safety, whether that's in your community, whether that's your business, your organization, reporting your own failures, talking about your own mistakes, talking about difficulties, imperfections, that actually, first of all, brings people closer to you because then you look human. And then the second thing, that makes people feel safe and okay to report their own mistake and failures to improve the process. And also, as Amy gives us a few examples, some companies do things like fuck up Fridays or some others mistake of failure celebration awards, like they do at some of the Google innovation of departments, and that also brings more safety and more awareness to the fact that failures and mistakes, that's how we learn and that's how we improve. When it comes to personal failures and mistakes, how we can get better at making less mistakes, and then also recognizing that certain failures are part of the process. And if you want to innovate, if you want to create something new, if you're working on something that has never been done before, maybe it's been done before by someone else, like somebody, people build $1 or billion companies, but not in the way you're building, and perhaps you're building a completely different product or service, and maybe it's slightly different, but that combination of factors just never been like it is in your case. So you are innovating. And first of all, understanding the fact that innovation does not happen without failure, and realizing that fact, and also realizing that you learn, or hopefully lean into that failure, and you learn and you get better through that failure. Every failure is actually brings you, when you learn from it, a step forward towards success. It's like Edison frame again. I did not fail 10,000 times. I found 10,000 times that it didn't work, and that brought me closer 10,000 times to the right solution, right? Adopting these frames, reframing things, that's one. Understanding that innovation does not happen without failure. That's number two. Number three, paying more attention to our mistakes and failures, and learning how to pause. For that, mindfulness training helps as well. Different kinds of meditations and breath work. Just taking a pause and like, this happened. Didn't happen as I planned. What happened there? Let me lean into that, learn from it. Sometimes that learning involves asking other people. Well, I got to know, why is that? Could you elaborate on that? What went wrong? What could I do better next time, right? Or if you do a workshop, or if you do a talk and things just didn't go as well as you planned, the results, etc., you may actually ask the person, what can I do better next time? What do you think can add value or positive to the experience or the impact, right? You can also ask people, once you learn how to pause and like, this is how I learn, and if I learn more, I have a chance to get better faster. So in a way, the faster you fail, the faster you'll succeed. And then you can celebrate not just failures, but also successes, but also celebrating with ourselves, right? We took action. We put ourselves out of our zone of comfort. Celebrate that, not just personally, but also with people around you, your family, your kids, your roommates, your company, however small, however big your team. Celebrate that, learn from it, help other people to do the same. Then also, again, reframing, like pivoting instead of failing helps. It lightens that up. Getting a hobby where you can be failing in low stakes environment, or training some of the skills or some of the, for example, when it comes to relationships or conversations, training that with your friends instead of perhaps your employer or someone who is more important and more can be at stakes. So practicing in low stakes situations, getting a hobby. And for me personally, I just would like you to remember that if you're playing to win, as a lot of you listening to this podcast are, if you're playing to win, if you're truly committed to building some vision, then also realize you're choosing the path of a lot of failures, guiding failures or pivots along the way. And so do expect them. And then instead of feeling negative about that, just look in the eye of that failure and thank it. Thank you for the lesson. Let me see how I can do better. Learn from it, document the journey, share it so other people can learn from it and also are more willing to share their mistakes and failures. So we all as humanity get to learn faster, better to create more amazing world for all of us. So play to win. Start playing not to fail. Like in relationships, actually, I think I used to play a lot more not to fail. And now that I'm playing to win, it's not easier, but it's definitely more rewarding. Just like with my business, with everything that I do, playing to win. Yes, it will bring you more challenges, but it also so much more rewarding when you actually lean into the thing that is not working, that you're not good at. You look it in the eye and you say, thank you, I'm learning. And because of that, I'm going to win. That's it for today. I hope you found this episode useful. If you want to learn more, read more about intelligent failures, basic failures, complex failures, how to think in systems to, for example, prevent complex failures at the organizational level. A lot of interesting concepts I learned from the book that also made me a different framework for failure and mistakes and the whole process, and different framework for handling my entrepreneurial journey and my life, right? So pick up the book by Amy Edmondson, Right Kind of Wrong, While Learning to Fail Can Teach Us to Thrive. And I can also tell you that in my coaching with entrepreneurs, with teams, with startups, handling rejection and failure is a huge thing, like a huge thing. Not being emotional about that, not allowing it to stress you out, to burn you out emotionally and mentally, psychologically, energetically. Such a huge thing. And also it will slow you down unless you learn to go through it like this, especially when the stakes are low. And faster iteration, faster failure will bring you more success faster. Just get through it. Learn how to pivot, instead of feeling like rejection and failure all the time. So the right kind of framing, the right kind of approach to dealing with failure, that's what I'm teaching, what I'm learning. And that is one of the biggest either stumbling blocks or accelerators of your success. By the way, folks, speaking about working together in coaching, mindset coaching specifically, also personal effectiveness and productivity, attention focus, all of that, but also dealing with negative emotions, with failure, with burnout. If you want to get a guided session where I'm going to give you the best strategies for your specific situation, then please go to use the link in the show notes to schedule our complimentary executive coaching session, especially if you are an ambitious visionary founder or on a team of a purpose-driven startup. Use the link in the show notes, schedule it, and let's figure out how you can amplify, change, redesign your own mindset so you could deliver nothing less but your absolute best. So the link is in the show notes. Also feel free to share it. And don't forget to share this podcast, which will make such a huge difference, even if you share it with just one other person. The world is changed by one person taking intentional actions at a time, one action at a time. So share it. One person can change the world. So help this person to get better and get out of their own way. So share this podcast. That's the message. Have an amazing failure from which you learn. Have an amazing week ahead. Embrace it. Get better to build more success. Thank you for your attention, and I'll talk to you very soon.